Okay, welcome to this GCSE RS revision video. This is the component 3 World Religion Islam, and we're looking at beliefs and teachings in Islam, and this is video 3 of 5 videos. In this video we're looking at prophethood or Risala, why prophets are important, Adam is the first prophet, Abraham is the father, Isaac and Ishmael and his significance, Isa as a prophet in Islam, and Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. So let's take a look at this. The key idea to understand behind this idea of Risala is the idea of revelation. That Muslims believe that God reveals his truth through messengers. And so the previous video on is really important. That God, Tawheed, reveals himself through messengers, prophets. Islam teaches that God does not communicate directly with humans, with Muslims. Instead, he uses special beings, humans, and especially angels, to carry his message to us. God's duty is, in a sense, to guide us. We need guidance. The first surah of Islam talks about guide us on the straight path. Our problem, in contrast to perhaps what Christians believe, is not so much sin as lack of knowledge, ignorance. We need to be guided on the straight path. And those who are not on the straight path are thought to be, most importantly, ignorant or are lacking in knowledge. So Muslims believe that because all humans have a duty to serve God, he must have shown us what his will is. As humans, we can only know what is truly right or wrong by understanding God's laws. Great emphasis in understanding or knowledge in Islam of the right path. And since God is just, it makes sense to believe that he must have shown us the right path to follow. So revelation is God's inspired truth about the right path. It's the idea that God has made known his special truth to humans. Islam teaches that the prophets received God's divinely inspired message, instructing humans how to live. And it was especially the final prophet, the seal of the prophets, Muhammad, and his message that is considered the perfect message. The traditional teaching is that it was given to Muhammad over a 23-year period, and that he was first, as it were, received his first message when he was meditating in a cave. The traditional teaching is outside of modern day Mecca, and he was visited by the angel Jibril, who approached him and squeezed his neck and said, recite, Muhammad, recite. And so he recited the first surah and went back and he memorized it, and others memorized it, but it wasn't written down immediately. And what happens is this process of memorization. Over 23 years, he receives these revelations, each time going back and reciting, and people would recite. And this idea of recitation is very important in Islam. It's not until later the traditional view is after his death, that the belief is after his death, the people who could recite his teachings were then brought together, because some of them were dying in a battle, the claim is, and that at that point then the Quran was written down. So the Quran is the final revelation to Muhammad. The Quran says about itself, this is the book about which there is no doubt, the guidance for those conscious of Allah or God. Now, prophet in Islam is the word a rasul. A rasul is a prophet, and Risala means bringing prophecy from God. So a rasul, a prophet, is the channel of communication between God and humanity. This is called Rasala or Risala. The prophets are our guides. They are human beings chosen by God to carry guidance from God to people. But their wisdom does not come from within themselves. This is not a Christian idea of inspiration. It's much more direct. There's less kind of humanness involved. It comes directly from God, and you just recite. Like a typewriter, you just remember, repeat, and eventually it'll be written down. And the Islamic teaching is like that. So the Quran teaches us that every community has given its own prophet. There are 25 prophets from the Jewish scriptures mentioned in the Quran, bringing God's message in a book. The message brought, however, by the Prophet Muhammad is essentially the same message as they claim has been preached all along by the prophets all the way back to Adam. The need to worship one God, the true God, who will be the judge of all. And this might be true, or there might be differences between Christians and Jews and how the prophets in the Old Testament are being interpreted. Muhammad is therefore seen as the last. After Isa, or Jesus, Muhammad is considered the last and the greatest prophet, the seal of the prophets. So Muslims believe that throughout history, God has communicated to humans through revelations, and the last and greatest of these revelations is given by the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad did not come from a rich family, and the claim is, and it's an important historical claim that can be investigated. It's quite interesting looking at those that are investigating this history at the minute. He didn't come, the claim is, from a rich family, and it's likely he could not read or write, but he could recite, he could remember. He was not a learned man, is an important part of Islamic tradition. He wasn't a scholar, but he was very devout. That's an important thing for Muslims, his piety, his devoutness. He would take himself for days off into the desert to meditate in caves and to seek Allah, God. Muslims believe that God chose Muhammad as a prophet because he was of his virtues. He was he was an honest man, a man who could trust with special message. It's due to his ordinary work. He was referred to as Muhammad the Honest. The Quran says God chooses for himself those he wills and guides to himself, whomever turns back to him. So bringing God's message, Islam teaches that God sent many prophets throughout history. 25 in the Quran are mentioned, going all the way back to the creation of the world. Remember, Shia think there are 124,000 prophets, many, many more than are mentioned in the Quran, obviously. The prophets that are mentioned in the Quran are characters from the Jewish and Christian scriptures, what Christians refer to as the Bible. However, Islam teaches that over the centuries, the message of these prophets has been lost or corrupted. So actually the Injil of Jesus, the writing of Jesus, may or may not be the Gospels. It may be something else altogether. The scrolls of Abraham, Sarafa, again, are lost, the lost scrolls of Abraham. So there was a need for a final and a perfected revelation, not corrupted by false belief, such as the Trinity or the two natures of Jesus. Muhammad is known as the seal of the prophets because of his revelation, the revelation of the Quran, which was the final and absolute and perfect word of Allah. Muslims are very quick to talk about the perfection, the miracle of the perfection of the Quran, that nothing has been changed. It's perfect. Again, an interesting claim that can be investigated. Muslim traditions say that in total there have been 124,000 prophets. This is what Shia are very quick to point out and teach. That's their emphasis. Once a prophet has been called by God, he lives a sinless life. That's an interesting idea. This is exemplified in the life of Muhammad. He lived a sinless life from a very early age. There's a story about Muhammad having a black spot, and this black spot being removed by an angel. Muslim authors put the word peace be upon him in Arabic when they use the word Muhammad, and perhaps after other prophets, to show them that the sort of deep level of respect they believe they have. Remember, there's no Jesus, there's no incarnation in Islam. And actually, the idea of the message, the message, the Quran itself, in a way, is as close as you can get to, in a way, the kind of concrete presence of God in the world. So if we look at a couple of the prophets in particular, it's really important we understand some examples. Adam is said to be the father of the human race. According to the Quran, Allah formed Adam from a handful of soil of many colors, and that's a different story to the Genesis one. Perhaps that's the corruption of Genesis. God had commanded the angels to gather dust or earth from different places, all except, it's claimed, the devil, as it were, who didn't do that. Anyway, this represents the diversity of people on earth. Islam is a very diverse religion. Eve is created from Adam's rib, as in the Genesis story, and they live together in paradise. But it's a slightly different idea of paradise, reading the Islamic stories to the Genesis one. They are commanded not to eat from a particular tree, as in the devil, as in the Bible, but the devil was able to convince them to taste its fruit. As a result, they are banished to the earth. However, Adam confessed his sin and was forgiven. That's very important to establish him as the first prophet, which is kind of different to the Genesis story. Muslims believe that Adam was created as God's Khalifa. There's an important word. Khalifa means his representative on earth, his leader on earth. It was his job to rule in the place of God. And tradition says he built the first house of God, Kaaba in Mecca, where the stone is found, and today is the black cloth covered building that is a cube-shaped building in the center of Islam's holiest mosque, the great mosque in Mecca or Mecca. And so that's a really interesting claim that there is a city that dates thousands of years back that was founded by Adam when he built the first house of prayer, Mecca. Abraham as well is an important prophet of the 25 mentioned in the Quran. We're not doing all of them. Like Noah, we've skipped over Nud or Noah. But Abraham is regarded importantly as a Hanif. What is a Hanif? This means he had an inner knowledge that there is only one true God. And that is similar to the Jewish scriptures, that Abraham was living in a polytheistic culture, and he was called by God to leave his polytheistic culture and go to a land where he would develop a monotheistic faith. For this reason, we see he's seen as the greatest of the prophets before Isa, Jesus, so hence his importance. He was born in a family of polytheists. People believe many gods, but he rejected these beliefs in favor of monotheism. And he became, it's claimed, a Muslim, one who bows down to Allah. Now, Abraham's mentioned in the Quran, and it said Abraham was neither Jew nor a Christian. Now, that's true. He was a polytheist, but he was inclined towards truth, a Muslim submitting to God, and he was not of the polytheists. That's important. Abraham had two sons who were both prophets. And this is where the stories begin to diverge. The first son, Ishmael, the prophet for the Arabs, and Isaac, or Ishak, the prophet for the Jews. And for Muslims, it's Ishmael is the more important. He is the ancestors of Muhammad. Now, in the Islamic story, it is the story is switched around. The two sons are switched around. When Muslims go on Hajj, they remember the distress of Hagar, Ishmael's brother, as she ran between the hills of Al-Safa and Al-Marwa in search of water. They remember how God instructed Abraham to sacrifice not Isaac, but Ishmael. In the Islamic story, it's Ishmael whose is God tests, and who is his favorite son, and he nearly kills until God intervenes. And in the story, it's not God who commands Abraham or Abraham. It's Satan. Satan tempted Abraham to disobey God, telling him to refuse to sacrifice his son. So this is an addition to the Islamic story. Abraham drove the evil one away by throwing stones at him. And you remember when you go on Hajj, you throw stones at the great pillars that represent Satan in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca. So there's a tradition that God revealed a holy book, the scrolls of Abraham, or known as the Sanafa. So he's a Hanif, and the Hanif. So the scrolls of this holy man, this pious man. The Quran mentions this book, but no record of it exists today. Nobody knows this book. There's no evidence of this book at all existing today. So Abraham's an important prophet. Other prophets, Musa or Moses, Muslims read typically the same thing about Musa that Jews do. And if the teachings of Abraham have been forgotten, his book lost, so the new prophet had to be sent. So Musa, who led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt into the promised land, Islam teaches that he was given the word of God, and known as the Torah or the Torah. But the people were disobedient and the message became distorted. So he's important, partly because of the 10 Commandments and the laws. In Islam, there's a great emphasis on rules, laws, and so Musa is important because he brings, in particular, the moral commandments. Another important prophet is Dawood or David, King David, Israel's greatest king, who made Jerusalem a holy place. It's claimed for Muslims. Remember, this is 1500 BC. He receives the word of God in the Zabur or the Psalms, beautiful hymns of praise to God. And Muslims use the Psalms today, as Christians and Jews do, in their personal devotion and collective devotion and piety. So these are some of the important of the 25 mentioned perhaps in the Old Testament Jewish scriptures. Jesus is also important. Now, the word Isa is not the same as the Arabic or Aramaic for Jesus. It's more an equivalent of Esau in the Old Testament. But nevertheless, Buddhists equate Isa with Yeshua, which would be the Aramaic for Jesus. Kind of interesting, the play on words there. And there's quite a lot about Jesus actually in the Quran. He's mentioned quite a lot, as is his mother Maryam or Mary. He is the most prominent of the figures in the Quran after Muhammad. Well, maybe. It recognizes Isa as a prophet, as a successor to Moses, and that he is given the Injils, which is normally thought of as the Gospels, but in some Muslim sources it's thought of as a book that Jesus wrote that's been lost as well. He performed miracles, including some of the Quran talks about some of the miracles he performed in his childhood, which the Gospels don't talk about. And there are dialogues that are not in the Gospels that are found in the Quran. How Muslims deny, in particular, however, it's important, any Christian teaching about the Trinity. They reject the idea that Isa is divine, is God the Son. And they say God is one and not three. Now, it's not quite clear what the Quran means by the Trinity, whether it's God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or God the Father, the Son, and Mary is an interesting thing to look at. Well, the Quran teaches that although it appeared as if Isa had been crucified, in fact, he did not die. This is an important teaching. It's a great shame and prophets shouldn't be shamed. And to hang a prophet on a tree would have been a terrible thing. And God could not allow evil men to triumph over his prophet in such a way. So instead, various theories are proposed, usually a sort of doppelganger. God, Allah caused another to look like him and die in his place. And Isa was taken straight up to heaven and will reappear in the second coming when God judges the world, or at least either on his own. Shia think that it will be the Mahdi who returns more than Isa. And this is found in Surah 4:157. And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. Now, this is really quite fantastic as a claim, and it's one that you can investigate for yourself. Early Christians claimed Jesus did die. Many of the early sources thought he did die. Many modern atheist scholars agree the evidence points to the death of Jesus. The theory of a doppelganger, you can investigate it. How likely is it that a doppelganger died in Jesus' place? Perhaps even a twin of Jesus or something like that we never heard about. You investigate that for yourself. It's an interesting point of debate between Christians and Muslims. So on to Muhammad, the greatest of the prophets, the seal of the prophets. Islam teaches that he's really important, that he's the last and greatest, sent by God. He's a role model for Muslims because of the moral and prayerful way he lived his life. Unlike Jesus, he performed no miracles, or at least not explicit ones. Perhaps the story of him hiding in the cave when he's being pursued on Hijara, and a spider and a robin save him because the spider's web is in front of the cave and the robin's nest is in front of the cave, and this protects Muhammad from his pursuers during the Hijara, and so he can escape from the Meccan police, as it were, who were trying to get him. So for Muslims, he is a moral and prayerful person, a role model, and it's less about any miracles. But like other prophets, he is thought to be sinless, and that's not unlike Jesus. He was born, he lived and died as an ordinary man, albeit one who's a prophet, so therefore sinless. He had no black spot. So Muslims can then see him as a perfect example of a human being. And for Muslims, the question, what would Muhammad do is an important question. How do they think about how their morals work? Well, they think, what does it say in the Sunnah and the Hadith about the sayings and the life of Muhammad? And they try and copy and imitate him. Who is Muhammad? Well, the traditional Islamic story is that, and we get this from his biographies a couple of hundred years in the 9th century, Ibn Hasib's biography in the 9th century tells us the story that he was born in Makkah in Arabia in 570 CE, but by the age of 6 he'd become an orphan. As he grew up, he gained a reputation for truthfulness and intelligence and worked as a shepherd for his uncle until in his 20s he entered the service of a wealthy merchant named Khadija. And he was so impressed with his honesty, nicknamed him Muhammad the Honest, and character that Khadija proposed marriage. And they married and had 4 daughters and 2 sons who sadly died in infancy. Life in Makkah, well, as he grew older, Muhammad began to feel troubled by the corruption, the polytheism, and the cruelty he saw in Makkah. He believed that the worship of idols by the people of Makkah was wrong and that there was really only one true God. He was a monotheist. So he spent much time away from Makkah in the hills that are claimed to have been nearby it, in a cave in particular. And it's during a special night called the Night of Power, Laylat ul-Qadar, the Night of Power, and solitude, that in the year it's claimed 610 CE, he was praying in this cave near Makkah, and he had an experience that would change his life. As he sat meditating, the angel Jibril appeared before him and ordered him to recite the words that had miraculously appeared before him. Muslims call this event Laylat ul-Qadar, the Night of Power, and they remember it today as the 27th day of Ramadan. It's one of the holiest days of the Muslim year. And he receives the revelation of the Holy Quran, at least the first revelation. These revelations were to continue. Remember, he couldn't write, he could memorize, he could recite. The word Quran means to recite. And he would recite, he would memorize, he would go back, and his family and followers would also recite until his death. He didn't always see the angel Gabriel. Sometimes he heard a voice speaking to him. Sometimes these revelations took place while he was in prayer. At other times, he was just going about his everyday life. And there are various hadith statements about the stories. Not once did I receive a revelation without thinking that my soul had been torn away, the hadith said. They are the profundity of these revelations it's describing. So what was the Prophet Muhammad's message? The message brought to the people of Mecca was, in summary, there is one true God, Lord of goodness and power and all the other 99 names. We need to show thanks to God through worship of a one single God, and that there will be a judgment day where God will judge our lives. Now, this didn't go well for him in Mecca, according to traditional story. They didn't receive his message well. They were polytheists. He was ridiculed and insulted. However, some did follow him, and they became known as Muslims. Muslims, those who submit to Muhammad's message. So as a prophet, remember we're thinking about Risala or prophethood, he is the greatest of the prophets. He faced opposition from the community of Mecca. So because of that, over the years, having had his revelations, experiencing opposition in Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad gained some followers, but his ideas angered so many and Mecca was a center of pagan pilgrims who came to worship the idols in the Kaaba. Bringing great wealth to the city, Muhammad began preaching openly the worship of idols offended God. These idols were no more than useless bits of wood and stone. So his message that God was merciful, but that he will be a day of judgment, caused many to turn against him and threaten violence. In only 10 years, the Prophet Muhammad struggled to gain converts in Mecca and to recite the things he was hearing from the angel Jibril with little success. And then tragedy struck. Two of his closest supporters, his uncle and his wife Khadija, died. It was a devastating, devastating blow. A key event then is Hijrah, and it for many Muslims is that it's year zero, the migration from Mecca to Medina. Here we see in the map below the places that it's claimed this happened. Modern day Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina. You can go there today. Not long after, while he was teaching in Mecca, the Prophet was approached by pilgrims from Yathrib, a city some distance to the north. They were impressed by the message and invited him to visit to judge their community disputes. So he agreed and sent some of his followers ahead of him. And as he planned to leave, it became clear that his life was in danger. There were people plotting to kill him. Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, insisted in staying behind in Mecca to act as a decoy while Muhammad made the journey. The migration of Muhammad from Mecca to Yathrib is known as the Hijrah. It marks the start of the Muslim calendar, the beginning of the year, and also perhaps year zero. The Prophet Muhammad is welcomed in Yathrib, where there were Christians and Jews. He came to be seen not just as a prophet, but also as a political and military commander. He became the city's ruler, and it was renamed from Yathrib to Medina, the city of the Prophet. And for the next 10 years, he worked to unite the different communities. There were a number of Jewish tribes in Medina. The Jewish diaspora had been around the ancient world for a long time, and he expected them to become Muslims. However, many rejected the Prophet Muhammad's belief. The revelations he received were from the same God they worshipped. They refused to believe that they should now turn towards Mecca to pray instead of Jerusalem, that they should fast during Ramadan. Some of these Jewish tribes in Medina began to plot against Muhammad, and so he was forced to expel them from the city and do other things, it has to be said. By 630, he was gaining enough support across Arabia to march back on Mecca. There was a period of wars between Medina and Mecca. With his army of 10,000 men, he faced overwhelming force. The rulers of the city, however, conceded defeat and opened the gates. Mecca was taken without shedding a drop of blood, and the Kaaba was cleansed of idols and rededicated to Allah. So when he returns to Mecca triumphant, or Mecca as we call it today, in 630, his followers were able to join him. The claim is they forgave their enemies, established Islam as the permanent religion, and Muhammad was not accepted as the final true prophet. He continued to lead the community until his death in 632. One of the important hadith statements in his final sermon, not in the Quran, but a very important statement, is, "I leave behind me two things, the Quran and the example of my life, the Sunnah." Very important. And if you follow these, you will not fail. It's absolutely key for Muslims. What did Muhammad say? What did he do? So that's the Prophets, video 2 of 5 videos in our topic. Stop now, do some practice questions, go to the website, do the topic test, maybe watch the video again, and look at some model essay answers.